39-23.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Commissioners, there's no unfinished business in front of us. So with new business, first item is a presentation from the village planner, Courtney Kashima of Muse Community and Design.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here to report out on the work of the Altenheim Advisory Committee. The draft recommendations from the committee were included in your packet. Just wanted to share that we had 11 dedicated and professional members of this committee, and a quick thank you to them. We had Roberto Escalante, David Gouleas, Kurt Hansen, Tag O'Brien, Scott Preslack, Stephen Rouse, Jocelyn Sims, Jeff Smith, Karen Swinger, Marty Talalian as chair, and Mark Zinni. These members volunteered their time over 9 months, August of 2022 to March 2023. We had a nice diversity of professional backgrounds, length of time in the village, many measures of diversity, and I've staffed a lot of committees in my 20 years of doing this. I really haven't seen a group that was so passionate and dedicated to grappling with the issues, to hearing different perspectives, and positioning the village for success. So their recommendations are included in your packet. Their process included a site tour, early site plans. We had members draw their own site plans to communicate ideas and see where there was consensus. They hosted a variety of residential groups and sister agencies like the Park District, Concerned Van Buren Citizens, and the Altenheim Senior Living Board of Directors, as well as the Altenheim Ad Hoc Committee, to make sure they were taking everything in consideration for developing their report. So you see their recommendations there, and you'll see where they felt like the extent of their expertise ended. And that is, they've given recommendations on a little bit of process, what the property should include, some ideas on how to achieve that in a regulatory sense, but they acknowledge that there are some things beyond their expertise. So it's really taking this vision and these recommendations, and I think at this point it's time to kind of put a lot of meat on those bones, so to speak, thinking about things like, how will this impact village finances? What should we expect from a land sale? What are the infrastructure needs? And I'll say, since the committee concluded its work, one of them recommended that staff meet with a consulting firm who specializes in this, sort of the positioning of public property in a private development sense. So we did meet with him, asked him to put together some information. This firm is called Chicago Consultant Studio, headed by Tim Brengel. Two of their projects people might know. One is the Stroger Hospital, positioning Old Cook County Hospital for something well beyond the building. And then also Harper Court in Hyde Park. So if you can think about when all the restaurants and shops popped up along 53rd, similar idea, they were involved in positioning that. So tonight there's nothing for you to vote on necessarily. I would like direction perhaps on whether we should continue speaking with Tim, or how we might want to take the good work of the committee and position it for developer solicitation, I would imagine.
Commissioners, any feedback, any questions for Courtney?
I know this wasn't addressed specifically in the report, but it was something that was brought up by one of the members of the committee about looking at the whole Des Plaines corridor, including the parking lot by the Blue Line. Would that be something that this consultant could potentially look at too? Or would it be strictly limited? Or we probably don't know yet, but is that something you could address?
Yeah, it's funny, in early conversations, Tim and I, this Tim Brengel, we're kind of a similar mind that there might be an opportunity to kind of lift our heads up, maybe go a scale up and see if, while this acreage is the primary focus, if there's something bigger to do, because it is sort of a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The village doesn't have, too many parcels of this size that are vacant and ready for development. So I think Tim or someone like them would be, at your direction, able to kind of look up at the context and see if there's a bigger move and or focus specifically on the land already under consideration.
Courtney, not long ago, I was at a function where there were staff from the Metropolitan Planning Commission or Council. And I just got into a very general conversation with some of the people who were there. And they mentioned that there are a number of grants that are out there now as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. And there are grants out there to help communities like Forest Park plan on what to do with properties. I think one in particular was called the Thrive Grant. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. But what I'm wondering is if maybe either yourself or through your network, maybe you could help us identify, funding sources that could potentially, pay for the professional services that would go towards planning something like this. I'm not sure we're in a big hurry, right? The Altenheim Committee was pretty methodical, I think, as far as they approached their work. And I know they were eager to get the report out. And Tim Brangle sounds like a very able person. But I'd like to see, funds available to pay for it, and not us pay for it if we don't have to pay for it. But I'm all in favor of bringing in a master planner, for lack of a better term, because as an elected official who's kind of worked on this and someone who lives here, I think that I may have my own biases, and there might be other people with very different ideas on how to possibly fit a development within the larger scope, and help think about more what Forest Park can do within the context of being neighbors to Maywood, neighbors to River Forest, neighbors to Oak Park, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a little bit concerned, and I hope you can help us with some of the funding issues that would go with paying for this service.
Definitely, and it does feel like there's a window of opportunity with different funding sources coming from the federal government. I will also say the level of detail, like to bridge the work of the committee to actually getting shovels in the ground. Some people say we're already in a recession, some people say it's coming. I think we want to be very specific about this big and important piece of property. So how to pay for it is certainly a part of that, and happy to look into those programs.
Mayor? Courtney, yes, first of all, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks to you and the rest of the committee members for bringing it to closure, so to speak. Sounds like there's a lot of work left to do here, but can you just talk briefly? So Chicago Consultant Studios, Tim, he's been involved to some certain degree with the committee to this point. What would be the next step? He would come to a council meeting, he would kind of digest, provide a proposal, some different ideas. What does that look like?
Sure, and just to clarify, he wasn't involved in the committee. He has reviewed their materials. He was recommended from one of the committee members to us as someone we should talk to. I think especially they had in mind how his firm was able to advise President Preckwinkle and the Cook County Commissioners on what to do with the old Cook County Hospital. So he reviewed the materials. He's a resident of River Forest, and he sits on their Economic Development Committee, and really interested in cross-boundary cooperation as a neighbor in that position. What would happen next is, if you guys directed Steve and myself to explore this further, we would bring back a more formal proposal, and Tim would probably attend a meeting to speak for himself. But just to give you a sense of what it might include, it would mean a master plan that takes the committee's vision and gets more specific, and sort of tests that in the market, and has maybe a few scenarios that would also be tested. And then he would guide the village in all of the aspects of pre-development that need to happen, from a zoning strategy to incentives to funding and financing, utilities and infrastructure, all of those details that are really important. And then advise the village on a solicitation process. So I do know that Tim recommends first an RFQ. So you just get qualifications from developers, find the best one, or narrow it a bit, and then issue a proposal to make sure that you're getting the best responses from the top developers. That's been sort of his proven methodology. And then he helps guide through the implementation and selection of a developer. So that would be kind of the longer view, but also the next steps of him submitting a formal proposal and coming to speak to you about it.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One of those would be Chicago Consulting Studios. That's the consultants. Okay. And who recommended him?
Steve Rouse.
Steve Rose. And then were there village representatives in those meetings that you had with him? Because I hadn't heard anything about these, and I was just curious, like, how many meetings there were and who was there.
Sure. So first, I had a phone call with Tim, and then I think Steve and I had a phone call. And then, I'm trying to remember, there was quite a few phone calls just to bring him up to speed and see what this might look like. And then there was one meeting with Steve, myself, Tim, the mayor, and Commissioner Maxion.
So I am public property. I'd love to be looped in on these when they do happen. And I look forward to a proposal. I think just with finances and doing these things piecemeal, they can really add up. Just what we've spent on this so far has gotten a lot higher than we'd expected. So I would trust he would give a presentation for the full scope of work and what that would cost.
Right.
And then one thing I think that we might be missing, and this might be more council question, because I know the committee had opted not to do the final community outreach portion of it. But we had hoped that they would come to one or two sort of final proposals and then would present those to the community, get their feedback, make any adjustments as seen fit, and then present to the council. And I know it was already 9 months in, and I think they were getting pretty worn out. They did a lot of work. So it's sort of in our shoes, or our it's up to us at this point to follow up with the community outreach and getting appropriate amounts of feedback, I think, before we start making plans on what developers we're selling to or what is happening in that space. I think at this point it's incomplete until we do that portion of it. I know the few surveys they did, that they're not large enough to be statistically significant, and it certainly doesn't represent sufficient buy-in from the community going forward just yet. So I'm just curious when we want to work in the public engagement and outreach before we start talking about those next steps.
Isn't that what they did, public engagement and outreach? No?
No?
They had how many meetings?
10.
10?
Plus, excuse me, the intercept survey, meaning they caught people during the wine walk along Madison Avenue.
And all those meetings were subject to the Open Meetings Act,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, so I think that was public engagement, and I don't think that what the consultant is doing, it's my turn to talk right now. I don't think the consultant is helping us decide what developers to sell to. He's a planner. There are probably other planners out there, but before we jump to conclusions, maybe we should hear from him and hear what his services are. You mentioned that your public property, you weren't looped in. we can't violate Open Meetings Act, right? So we had 2 commissioners there with the consultant and the director
Speaking
of
about
public
public
works.
property.
Correct. As the mayor, I felt like I could be part of that. We can have Tim Brendel come and present to the council, and you can learn more about what he does. So let's just kind of leave it there. The committee did great work. They sacrificed their schedules. And we went about this in a really different way from anything we've done for this kind of project in the village before. So, do you have any other questions, Commissioner?
I would just like to add that the presentation that's in this agenda was never uploaded to the Altenheim resources page. So the community never even had a chance to review their final recommendations until Friday night. That should have been presented to the community and said, this is what we're thinking, explain themselves, and they should have been given an opportunity to provide feedback. That was part of the discussion when we formed this committee, that would happen. Now, I understand that time gets away from us and they're very busy and have busy lives, and they said, we aren't prepared to do that, but we recommend that the council does. So I'm asking the council when we want to actually listen to our constituents.
We can upload that report.
Let's upload it now.
We can upload that report. And we're not going to sell anything to anybody anytime soon, okay? But I hear what you're saying. I think there were probably disagreements about the way the committee did its work, but they went over their work for a very long period of time. They brought in different stakeholders. I think it was a pretty complete process. I don't want to argue about that tonight, but we can upload their report, and there'll be plenty of time for input. But to your point, ultimately, this body is going to have to make a decision. But that decision is not going to be made anytime in the next 2 months, 3 months, probably 4 months. But maybe it does make sense to hire a master planner and be very careful about what we do with this property going forward.
And I recommend that we review multiple proposals to get the best, most affordable option.
Mayor?
Commissioner Nero.
Yes, I want to make sure I understand this. So it sounds to me it's just the next step here, Commissioner, as I look at this, and if I'm wrong, somebody speak up. It looks like the committee did their work. It's a loose framework of some potential options. None that are very surprising to me sitting up here, but it seems like it's reasonable and rational to think that the next step is to kind of take that and get an expert, in this case Chicago Consultants, to kind of provide an idea, a true tangible idea of what we think, what everybody really wants to hear, right? What we think is going to be at that property. And then we could look at that, we could look at his proposal, we could play with those ideas, we could take, add, subtract, and make decisions on what we think is best for our residents, right? And best for the community. And I think that's what's before us today, if I'm not mistaken. So it's almost like just taking that next step. No big, heavy decisions are being made as to this is what it's going to be. No heavy decisions are going to be that we are going with this particular consultant firm. It's merely tossed in their lap. Let's see what their proposal is. Let's see what it costs, and let's see what some other ideas are, from my understanding.
For what it's worth, it would be very natural to integrate engagement. They're not mutually exclusive.
Commissioner Govan, do you have anything? Commissioner.
I'd like to add, I agree with Commissioner Vogt. I do think we need a lot more public input. I think the committee decided that wasn't the role that they were going to take on beyond having open meetings. I think the question is, when is the best time to do that? Do we do that, at the very beginning of a process when, everything's wide open? Or do we wait until it's narrowed down and then say, here's a proposal that, is maybe halfway there, let's talk about how to make this better. So I think that's a discussion worth having, is at what point is the public input going to be most most useful to everybody. And I think, at the end of this, what really is important to me is that we're doing the right thing with the Altenheim, and I think it has to be among the council, it has to be a 5-0 vote. I mean, it doesn't have to be technically right, but I wouldn't be happy with anything that wasn't. I feel that something that was causing a lot of discord among the council members would mean that it wasn't the best plan for the village. So, whatever we have to do to figure out how to get to the best solution in terms of working together as council members and also working with the public and with a consultant, if we decide to do that, I think is the best approach to take.
Anything further, commissioners?
Yeah, I can say, I just want to add that as someone who was at the wine walk and, participated in the questionnaire and has, been a part of some of these pieces, I think snapshots at a moment in time to gather information has been just that. It's sort of what we knew at that time, but I do think, helping people understand, as the idea has taken shape and where we are, the public input and creating those opportunities is really important. So while I do think, we have sought input and I think from key stakeholders is what you're talking about, people have felt differently involved at different periods of time, and I think as we get closer, ramping up that engagement to make sure that everybody is really invested is going to be important for me to see. And I think we can do that, like you said, Commissioner Maxham, in a meaningful way that makes it possible for us to communicate to the community what's happening and that people have buy-in and understanding. We may not all agree, but at least we can all have an understanding of what's happening and how we got to that place. So.
Courtney, thank you.
Thank you so much.
One other comment, Mayor. I would just like to reiterate, and it's actually Courtney's phrase, and I like it very much, but it's moving at the speed of trust. And I think that means that the community is involved with us every step of the way. We don't wait till the end where maybe their feedback would have been helpful in some of the earlier planning stages. They're with us every step of the way, because you're right, not everyone will be happy with the outcome, but if they feel like their voices were heard, they're going to be a lot more willing to move forward with us in whatever that outcome and process is.
I'm sorry. So, don't mistake my words. I'm not saying wait to the end, have a proposal. Here's what we're saying we're going to do. Everybody like it or love it. Here we go. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let's take the loose framework. Let's see what's reasonable economically, financially, based upon a professional's digestion of all the information to create something, and then we can look at it. Now we have something tangible, right, to hold on to and say, now, hey, what do we think about this? And I think that's the natural next step where we're all going to be collaborating with the community and each other. And I think that's kind of where we're at. That's where I'm at anyway. And I think it's natural to think that the next step would be, hey, let's move forward with the consultant and see what that looks like. Let's see what that looks like.
All right, commissioners, thank you for a good discussion. Courtney, thank you. And we'll move on to the next agenda item. Commissioners, next item is